Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Yani, Global Cultural Exchange, a new learning abroad program for First Nations students. My name is Morgan Flanagan, and I'm the coordinator of events and special initiatives at the BC Council for International Education. Thank you very much for joining us today on what I hope will be an informative session on Indigenous study abroad programming. Before we get started, it's important to acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now onto a few housekeeping items. I know we're all familiar with Zoom, but as a reminder, please use the Q&A function to send your questions or if you have any comments. If you require any technical assistance during the webinar, please use the chat box and we'll help answer your inquiry. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers for today from Trobe University and the minds behind this program. We have Sharon Collicott, Yani Program Coordinator, Indigenous Student Services, Renee Slay, Deputy Director, Indigenous Student Success, Brett Smith, Learning Abroad Advisor from the Learning Abroad Office, and Raul Sanchez Uribari, Associate Dean, Partnerships, School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Over to you all.
Thank you very much, Morgan and Nelly and everyone at the British Columbia Council of International Education. Good afternoon there. Good morning here for us tomorrow morning. My name is Raul Sanchez Uribari, and I'm the Associate Dean for Academic and International Partnerships and Associate Professor of Legal Studies here at Trobe University. Joining me today in person is my colleague Brett Smith from Learning Abroad here at La Trobe. And before we start, first of all, we wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we are and where you sit, and where any of the participants who are joining us today are. In our case, is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm, also known as Melbourne, Victoria. And we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. Well, for us, this is a very exciting event. We're going to be sharing with you what we call the fruit of a labor of love. We've been working collectively, Sharon and Renee from Indigenous Student Services here at La Trobe, Brett from Learning Abroad, and myself from the academic side of things as Associate Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, in a project to create new opportunities, encourage avenues for our Indigenous students, but also our Indigenous staff and our Indigenous students as well, from a group of partners or sister institutions, first located in Canada, and then we hope around the world as well. The program is known as Yani. And Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Yani started about a year and a half ago. We've been working together almost 2 years, right?
Yeah. Our relationship goes back a few years, but Yani kicked off around it a year and a half ago. That's right. Yeah.
Thanks, Brett. And you've mentioned a word right away that is very important for this presentation: relationships. Because that what eventually became a group of people working together constructively and happily was actually the result of relationships that we had been developing and evolving over the course of many years. Now, we'll come back to this point during the presentation. Now, in the not so good news, unfortunately, for a constellation of reasons that coincided, our colleagues Sharon and Renee are not going to be able to be with us here today. And they are really sad, devastated by not being here. And of course, for us, it's also a major loss. I mean, it's unfortunately being just a number of not so good reasons happening at the same time. But once again, I think an evidence of how we work together, we were able to put together a recording where Sharon and Brett share their impressions. And this is built on a presentation that they also gave at the Australian International Education Conference that took place here in Melbourne just last month. So they won't be able to be in person with us, but they've shared their knowledge and impressions and reflections through this presentation. And Brett, you will see Brett there with them. After we play the recording, We're going to come back to then continue the conversation and hopefully engage with your questions as well. We want the session to be as participatory and vibrant as it can be. And Brett, is there anything else that we would like to add before we play the webinar?
I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we are meeting on as well today here in Melbourne. So the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nations. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Ready to watch the video? Thanks, Brad.
No problem. Thank you, Brett. And bear with me as we play the share and make this work. I'll mute myself now and play. Welcome, everyone. Well, this is a pre-recording that we've made, given different circumstances that we were facing as a team and in the possibility or in the event that we wouldn't be able to present in person that day, or at least some of us. So thank you so much for the opportunity once again. With me, my dear colleagues here at La Trobe, Sharon Colocott from Indigenous Student Services, and Brett Smith from Learning Abroad. And once again, we're here to talk about the Yani Global Cultural Exchange Program, a new Learning Abroad program for First Nations students. Sharon, take it away.
I'd like to begin first by acknowledging that we're speaking today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. So if we could move to thank you. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to First Nations people joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty of Wurundjeri country, was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My name's Sharon Colocott. I work across La Trobe University's Indigenous Student Services as the Yani Program Coordinator and as a Research Assistant at Gabrabik Warrawilla Indigenous Research Centre. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce our Yani team. I'd like to give special mention to Renee Slee, who first came up with the idea for the program, and Raul Sanchez Uribari, who creates more opportunities and has more ideas than can be contained in any one program. I'll let my colleague Brett introduce himself.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I'm really grateful to be invited to present today, and I appreciate all of you for taking your time to join us. I'd like to start by echoing Sharon's acknowledgement to country and also pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. As Raul mentioned, my name is Brett Smith. I'm a Learning Abroad advisor. I'm part of the Learning Abroad and Sponsored Programs team, which is part of the Educational Partnerships portfolio at La Trobe University.
So Yani is a Woiwurrung word that means to journey. The Yani Global Exchange is a First Nations student mobility program that's been purposely designed to be accessible and culturally safe. It ties into La Trobe's 2022-2030 Indigenous strategy that commits to decolonising its curriculum. Next slide, please. The objectives of the program are to provide an accessible and culturally safe option for academic exchange between First Nations communities. It also aims to form a reciprocal mobility option that foregrounds Indigenous ways of being, doing and knowing. Also to provide a vehicle to internationalise student learning and create opportunities for cross-institutional connections, collaboration, research and knowledge exchange. Also to create and nurture lasting relationships, networks and bonds between sovereign peoples. Next slide. The design process began with a vision of how we wanted Yani to look. Our vision was for an accessible, connected and supported program that ensured strong and culturally safe supports for inbound students while ensuring that those same supports exist and are accessible for our outbound students. We developed a program outline to showcase Yani's offering and aspirations, highlighting that all services and supports available to our students would be available to incoming students. The program is designed to be responsive to the needs of each participant. Strong relationships and connections have been made to support the student at every step through accessible application and course selection processes, and ensuring accessibility supports and inclusion supports are established or carried across, and that the necessary connections are made, while also making connections between students and their host university with wellbeing staff, academics, learning abroad staff, and First Nations student support centres. Next slide. This is Brett.
Once the Yani program outline was in place, we had a clear framework to engage external stakeholders. Our team got together to review our exchange portfolio and identify suitable institutions we could partner with. We checked our mobility agreements and whether universities had their own dedicated First Nation centres. We shortlisted several institutions in the USA and Canada. I then proposed a quick Zoom chat with my counterparts, signalling our interest in deepening ties by exploring mobility options for First Nations students. If they were on board, we extended the invitation to First Nations centres to collaborate on Yani. Multiple meetings followed with stakeholders, always at ungodly hours, covering everything from student services to social cultural activities, support from Indigenous student centres, and whether our Aboriginal students would have the opportunity to meet with local First Nations communities while they're on semester exchange. With the groundwork laid, we started recruiting our first cohort. A few months later, our first cohort was off to the University of Calgary and the University of Guelph, our two inaugural partners in Canada.
For Yani, relationships are central to everything. We met with the first cohort over lunch on 2 occasions, with incoming Canadian students on campus and again out bush at the home of one of our Yani students. Those early connections led to the Calgary cohort sharing a house. The students have been embraced by the First Nations communities on their campuses. They've been invited to join in with the grandmother tea ceremony pictured here, up in the top left, and have attended powwows and other cultural events. A few weeks ago, our PVC Indigenous Michael Donovan was also warmly welcomed. He's pictured here at Calgary with our students at the Writing Symbols Lodge staff at the top right. Relationships mean that we can tailor our support to the needs of the individual. Ongoing informal conversations mean that we can continue to respond to each student's unique situations and needs. Relationships provide a safe and accessible space for early intervention. Collaborative staff relationships create networks that support this work. That's a brief overview of the Yani program. Next, we'll share some of the lessons learned that we've encountered along the way.
Next slide, please, Raoul. As a learning abroad practitioner, I often tell people that I've got the best job on campus. I give away lots of money and facilitate life-changing experiences, although you wouldn't guess that if you came past my office. Behind the scenes, learning abroad is very time-consuming and heavily administrative, with lots of deadlines. Some of you in the audience may be familiar with the Australian government's new Colombo Plan and Australia Awards program. Both scholarships provide an extra layer of support in the form of a dedicated case manager and a student contact officer. What sets the Yani program apart is the same extra layer of support. Enter Rao, our academic champion. He promotes overseas programs in classrooms, advocates for mobility within the schools, and helps students plan their studies abroad. Renee and Sharon excel at building relationships with our students, fostering a safe space for open dialogue while delivering culturally sensitive pastoral care. By leaning into relationships in other areas, the Yani program goes well beyond what our Learning Abroad office can offer. Lesson 1, learning abroad can't do this alone. We need to bust silos. Can you go to the next slide, please, Raoul? Thank you. And slide 2. We need to cater for all students. One size does not fit all. La Trobe Uni has a very diverse student population with significant numbers of students who are Indigenous, regional, first in family, and students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. We know that many of these underrepresented groups face barriers that limit their participation in mobility programs. Yani aims to address these obstacles by promoting visibility and representation, providing generous mobility grants, and offering comprehensive pastoral care support. A broad understanding of the unique needs of underrepresented groups is critical in designing such programs. Yani aligns perfectly with the growing need for a global EDI perspective in learning abroad and international education more broadly. Now to lesson number 3. I first met Renee around 6 years ago. I clearly remember being struck by a comment she'd made during one of our first conversations. She'd asked if we'd had an agreement with a particular university in Alaska. I said, yes, we do. It's active, but we can't send any of our students there. She'd asked, why not? It's a perfect destination for our students. We've got really strong connections there. I said, well, our numbers are way out of balance, so we've decided to freeze traffic for the moment. And she said, that's really disappointing. It should be more about relationships, Brett. When I connect the dots, I can see how that conversation flipped the script for me. So lesson 3, we should be open to doing things differently. In the fast-paced learning abroad sector, it's easy to stick with the same playbook. In Yani, the 4 of us, Renee, Sharon, Raoul, and myself have teamed up to create a program that offers an innovative solution. One that only came from thinking outside the box, or in this case, outside of our offices. That said, accountability is key. I still need to hit my KPIs, boost engagement, and scale the program, all the while ensuring that my efforts dovetail with the strategic goals of every unit involved in the program. It's a delicate balancing act, delivering a program that addresses equity inclusion while navigating limited resources and operational challenges.
I'd like to echo Brett's comments, particularly that we can't work in silos. Collaboration extends beyond resources, inviting conversations that reveal new opportunities and ways of working. I'd like to add one more lesson learned. We can move to the next slide. It's really important to connect early and maintain connection. The cohort friended me on Facebook, which provides an amazing snapshot into their journey. We also keep in regular email contact, but this is a really curated snapshot into the experience, as you can see in the photo collage earlier. A face-to-face Zoom conversation with one student revealed that there was a lot more going on below the surface. While navigating being neurodiverse, non-binary, and managing chronic pain while being alone on exchange, they also struggled with a complete lack of routine. Their mental health declined, particularly when they found out that their learning adjustments had not been applied as planned to their host university. With their midterms just days away, this was a massive problem. Fortunately, the relationships established through the program meant that this could be resolved, but it could have been avoided. Knowing each student's unique situation means that those issues may have been proactively addressed if an early conversation had have happened and if those conversations had have continued more regularly. Next slide, please.
Future plans. Inspired by the success of the Yani program, we're excited about exploring ways to apply the lessons that we've learned to support other equity groups at the Trobe Uni, who come with their own unique needs. With the Yani program model as a centerpiece, we envision launching a global EDI initiative. Next slide, please. A logical place to start would be in the regions. 1 in 5 La Trobe University students are based on our regional campuses, yet only 1 in 20 participate in outbound mobility programs. La Trobe has a really large regional footprint with campuses in Albury-Wodonga, Bendigo, Mildura and Shepparton, scattered all across the state of Victoria in southeast Australia. It'd be wonderful to build an alliance with colleagues on other campuses and design a similar initiative for our regional students. The goal isn't simply to raise awareness of mobility opportunities and increase participation rates, but to ensure there's equity, access and inclusion for all of our students. Next slide, please, Raoul.
Under the Yani umbrella, we have ambitious plans. We hope to expand our network to 7 First Nation partner universities and to host cohorts of other First Nation students from our international partners in 2025. We also hope to develop a short-term study tour for students unable to commit to a semester overseas. Next slide, please. When I think about the successes of Yani and the areas for growth and development, I always come back to the student journey and how they navigate the system. But without strong mechanisms in place that respond to the person as a whole, the program doesn't meet its objectives. The learning abroad space and processes are time-consuming and process-driven. There's so much to learn. I'm lucky to have ready access to people like Brett who can explain the steps or point me in the right direction with a quick Teams message. Students don't have that luxury, which can deter them from progressing with their application or even applying in the first place. Next slide, please. Through the lens of Yani, we've begun to work on mapping the student journey. We aim to create a comprehensive guide to navigating the exchange process. We also aim to develop a pre-departure wellbeing program that aims to build self-capacity and capability. The program would address issues First Nations people may consider or encounter while on exchange, including connection to home, ability to self-regulate, missing family, friends and community and country, strength in identity, understanding triggers, having difficult conversations, prejudice or violence in its varying forms. We need to consider the student holistically beyond getting them through the administrative processes and onto the plane. We need to think about success in other ways. What does a person need to thrive?
Next slide, please, Raoul. Thank you. Final thoughts. During welcome sessions with international exchange students, I invite them to guess what percentage of water is in the human body. On average, it's around 60 to 70%. What is interesting is that when we arrive in a new place, it takes around 1 to 2 weeks for our bodies to take on the water from the local water tables and make the students realize very soon that they'll be 70% Melburnian. It's a powerful metaphor to help deal with homesickness. It's normal to feel disconnected at first, but over time, you slowly absorb the qualities of your new environment. I then go on to talk about the amazing student support services that are available, the wide range of opportunities for all the Trobe students, social events, buddy programs, multicultural festivals. We do lots to add value, striving to deliver an outstanding student experience. More recently, we've been able to leverage technology with AI-driven nurture campaigns, virtual chatbots. All of these are tremendous value adds. But then I hear Renee admonishing me, what about relationships, Brett? What's exceptional about the Yani program is that it doesn't try to add value. It simply reveals what has always been. It is that which exists within each of us. Yani is built on values of love, connection, belonging, community, and caring for one another. Yani inspires because its foundation is the human element.
Yani's linked to advancing a decolonial perspective in connection with our Indigenous strategy, alongside an ethos of international solidarity and connections with First Nations people globally. In action, Yani forms a vehicle for knowledge, love and relationships to be shared amongst the oldest living cultures on Earth. These lessons can improve outcomes for First Nations communities through collaboration, education and friendship. Imagine the flow-on effects from that. Yani has been designed to remove barriers and to make this incredible life-changing experience something that's accessible, something a student can approach and think, this is for me. Having strong relationally driven engagement through all aspects of the program has meant that the cultural and wellbeing component of the program allows our students to feel supported and connected from the start. Yani brings us closer to our students, enabling us to deliver a really special program that's connected and responsive. Yani connects us to each other and to each student's story. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for listening. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to my colleagues, Brett and Sharon. Brett, did you want to say something?
Well, the video was taken around 6 weeks ago, and I think we've managed to develop the program a little bit more. We've had an active recruitment drive, and we've got quite a few more students ready to go overseas next year, 2025. So we are working really, really closely still, and these initiatives are moving forward. We're excited about our plans for 2025.
And exactly, Brett, absolutely. And for 2025, I am very glad that in the presentation, Sharon and you pointed out some of what's looming ahead in terms of what we wish to accomplish and what we see happening for Yani. What will be our intended efforts, expansion of the program in terms of number of students, in terms also of the background of students. There is a component of intersectionality that we want to address, in particular with our regional campuses. And I believe this can be particularly interesting as a point of comparison and connection with the day-to-day realities of several of our colleagues in British Columbia. Our campuses in La Trobe are located hours away from Melbourne in different locations that have their own ecosystems, preferences, and needs. And we know that this is an area that definitely needs, and where also has some of these locations also have a higher proportion of Indigenous students. So for Yani, it's very important to engage with a regional element or reality. The other aspect is, of course, to increase the number of partners and locations. And that in all itself presents a very interesting question. We have already some existing partners, but also we're open to new partners, to develop new relationships. And in the process of thinking about the locations, is actually quite interesting as well, because each one of these locations is different, presents a set of opportunities and challenges for ourselves, and most importantly for our students. And we're also conscious of that. And last but not least, in terms of our goals, there is the element of the study tour that we are hoping to plan, if not for 2025, for the following year. And this is connected to the reality that we know that, unfortunately, even if we expand the program, that would still be a relatively small percentage of the students who could potentially benefit from an international experience. So on one hand, we know that having a shorter program would allow us to have hopefully a higher number of students who experience going overseas. In our imagination, we have a very exciting kind of trajectory or map that would go all the way from Vancouver Island, jump into Vancouver, going all the way through the lower mainland to visit, hopefully, Fraser Valley, then up to the mountains, crossing into Alberta, and finishing at the University of Calgary. I need to evacuate from the library, unfortunately. Brett, you're going to have to take on the questions if you can. I'm going to have to change to my office. It's first time
Absolutely.
it's a presentation ever.
I trust it's a drill, Raul.
Sorry about that. I'll be right back.
So at this stage, I'd be happy to take any questions if there's anything from the floor anyone would like to ask. Happy to expand on any of those topics that we've covered during the presentation.
Hi, Brett. There's a question that came in beforehand, and maybe you can talk a bit about that one. It was someone who said they're interested to learn more about the admission process. So the students that you accept and then criteria that you consider for success and retention. Could you maybe give some more info about that one?
Yeah, thank you, Nelly. That's a good question. So I work operationally in the Learning Abroad team, and we have a standard process for all the Trobe students. When we are doing outreach, so when we're collaborating with the Indigenous Student Service Centre, the value add is essentially this pastoral care element. So the students are still required throughout the admissions process to meet each of the standard requirements that we set for all the Trobe students. So that goes across a WAM of 60. So we need students to be performing well academically. So we're not setting them up to fail when they're overseas. So we wouldn't be willing to accept students that are underperforming. They also need to have spent at least 12 months at university, so 2 full semesters. We want to make sure that they're familiar with the educational system here at tertiary level. So they're prepared then to go into another another university, and they're familiar at least with the structures there and the processes and the different systems that they'll be using. But essentially the admissions process is the same. What's different is Sharon's role. So Sharon plays a really, really important role in supporting the students through this process. She has direct access to me. I'm dealing with, there's around 300 students, I'd say, in my cohorts in the mix. I'm dealing with inbound students, outbound students. I manage a couple of Australian government scholarship programs as well. So I've got quite a number of different programs in my portfolio, but I liaise directly with Sharon and Renee in helping the students. So they receive close contact throughout the application process, through the admissions process. There'll be face-to-face sessions. So we'd be running any drop-in sessions are normally done virtually. Since post-pandemic, we've been doing virtual drop-ins. The Indigenous Student Services Centre actually running face-to-face sessions. I've been invited to some of those, and some of the welcome sessions that we have, the orientation sessions, I'm normally there, and it's a much more casual environment where we talk at length about what's involved and what students can expect. And we certainly bring students together during the admissions process from the get-go. So they are there to support each other as well through the journey, but they've also got that extra layer of support in Sharon, who's a project officer working to help these students, guide them through the admissions process. Besides this extra layer of care, I think there's incredible relationships that we've developed with the First Nations centres at the University of Guelph, at the University of Calgary. So the communication channels are certainly open as well. So any questions that we ask are promptly answered. So there's an element of nurturing that's taking place throughout the entire process. So the structure of the application process remains the same in many respects, but it's the touch points that we're leveraging. We're making it's a very different approach to meeting the students and guiding them through this. Is a tremendous amount of support, which is really welcome from the students. There's actually a podcast I'm hoping I might be able to share with you. One of our students, Charlie, is at the University of Guelph, talking at length about her experience through this process as well. And I might be able to share that with the audience at a later stage if I get permission to share that. I think it's been made public, I'm not sure, but I received that yesterday. It'd be really good to hear the student voice in how that process looks, because that was one of the questions asked during the podcast. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying, Brett. And if you can share the podcast, you can just let us know, and we'll make sure it reaches the participants in this webinar. We had a second question that was submitted beforehand, which is more about the design of the program. I know it was briefly touched upon in the presentation, but people were wondering if maybe you could give some more information about the inputs that have been sought to design the program and the curriculum to ensure that it's appropriate to the target audience.
Yeah, Raul has rejoined us. Nelly, I might ask you to repeat that question if you wouldn't mind, Raul, and I'll ask you to take that if that's okay.
Hi, Raul. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Happy you made it back to your office. Brett already answered one question about the admissions process. It was very clear, but we have another question coming in, and I'm maybe going to give that one to you. It's about the design of the Yani program. Someone who was wondering what inputs have been sought when designing the program, and like how you made sure that it's appropriate to the target audience. I know it was briefly touched upon in the recording, but maybe if you can give some more info, that would be great.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, of course, apologies for the jump. This has never happened in a presentation to me before. There was a drill at the library, so I had to exit my room and come back to my office. So now coming back to the question, a couple of things. With respect to the design, this is a part that Sharon, my colleague, thought through, and she actually has a few notes to share, and will be more than happy to share with the audience by email as well. But from my end, I can tell you a few things related to the pedagogical aspect and also to the nitty-gritty of the delivery of the program. So on one hand, we took advantage, as we have mentioned before, of the existence of pre-existence of relationships and partnership agreements that already were in place with other universities, but also the normal modalities of a student exchange and the structure of a student exchange offered by learning abroad. And enter Brett here with his knowledge about the processes and implications of how to work with the program itself. Now, here is what I feel, and for all of us was the interesting part. How does those structures, programs that were not designed for a program originally like Yani, I mean, we had to make do with the institution norms and structure that we already had. How do we adapt it to the realities of what we wanted to accomplish? And particularly for what an Indigenous lens, a decoloniality lens, would imply. How would that impact also the delivery on the ground and the type of assistance that students would receive pre, through, and after departure? The details of how we actually adapted these programs from the point of view of Indigenous student services can be elaborated or explained upon by sharing. Brett, you could probably touch a bit on that as well. But I can tell you that a few things. First of all, the challenges that already existed in terms of the selection of students and the inclusion of students. I mean, once again, we base our work in a close collaboration between Brett and Sharing to be able to select the group of students, to be of Indigenous students, and to support them through the process. And then came, of course, a process of pre-departure. And once on the ground, and I believe this has been the most important part, establish a form of collaboration that would be probably closer, more articulate and closer than what we would be able to usually offer, given the resources that we already have. And that's enters the question of resourcing. And in this case, our Indigenous students had the additional layer of support that came directly from the Indigenous services and from staff at Indigenous services that then connected with them and engaged with them over the course of their stay in Calgary. And that's proven to be a very important point of distinction over the sort of the normal regular experience, so to speak, of students on exchange. Brett, would you like to add a point in that respect?
Probably just what I've learned. I've learned to listen a lot as well. So we've been informed. All of our goals are dovetailing. There was an Indigenous strategy released, last year, and our efforts. We've made sure that everything that we are doing is we're looking at it through an Indigenous lens. So all of our efforts have been informed by the Indigenous student services. So in me sharing with Sharon and Renee our normal processes, it's always important for us to get that feedback as to how they would like to approach that particular aspect of any touch point. So I think that's been really, really important. Another thing I'd want to mention is the financial incentive that removed the financial obstacle. It's often perceived, but the Australian government is very generous in terms of funding for mobility opportunities for Australians generally. But I have to mention, I'm really proud of La Trobe because they offer a lot of funding for students. In this case, we were also able to give the Indigenous students the security and knowing that they'd be able to receive funding to go overseas and spend a semester away. I wanted to mention funding. I think that's really, really important as well in the program design. But there's always been an Indigenous lens that's been applied to all facets as we've progressed through this. So we're always consulting. Relationships is key.
Absolutely, Brett. And I wanted to add just very quickly that we knew from the beginning that this was that we were going to be learning by doing as well. That this was that in a way, well, this program was novel, was going to test the boundaries and the viability of existing forms and institutions, So we've been in constant communication also to redesign or readapt the program as it goes. And as Sharon pointed out in the presentation, whenever a problem arose, rely also on the relationships that we had with the students and with our counterparts in our partner institutions as well. And finally, one of the interesting things or aspects I've seen in that process is also the connection between the needs of our Indigenous students with other equity aspects, the intersectional aspect, so to speak, of the experience. And this is part of our learning process. For example, the need for thinking through again aspects of support from a socioeconomic perspective, from a neurodiversity perspective, and other aspects that are also important to support our students. But thank you very much for the question. It's actually very important.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Raul and Britt. There's one more question that came in regarding finding partners, and there's actually a follow-up question for that one in the Q&A as well that I can ask afterwards. But the question that was submitted beforehand was, what type of criteria do you use to connect with partner universities? Again, it was briefly touched upon in the recording, but maybe if you can give some more detail how you decide whether a potential university would be a good partner for the Yani program, if there's anything in particular you're looking for.
Raul, I can open with a couple of general comments. I think we mentioned during the presentation that we all sat down, we identified existing exchange partners that some of them have existed well before my time at La Trobe. I've been here for 6 years. We've got some partners that are 10, 15 years old, and we've got tremendous reciprocity in terms of sending and hosting students. So we wanted to reach out to existing partners, and we're always looking just to deepen and sharpen our relation and expand collaboration in some ways. So it was a logical consideration as to where we would start. With Len's, I think with Raul's input as well as to which universities would be best placed to shortlist in the first instance, we certainly were doing some desktop research and just trying to find which universities had large numbers of First Nations students as well, because this is based on reciprocity. We're really excited about hosting students as well coming over, and we've developed a really rich social cultural program, which is a manifestation of that focus on relationships. So we were looking at universities, existing partners with whom we already collaborate in learning abroad, but seeking collaboration with their First Nations teams. And that was a process of reaching out, having conversations, and finding out if there was appetite. Sometimes there was appetite, but the timing wasn't right. We had quite a number of conversations with partners in the US, Canada. We're looking all over the world. So we do have ambitious plans in this space to develop a much broader network in different parts of the world. But initially it was a sense of finding alignments within our profiles and making sure that the university had the same ethos. So there's a large number of underrepresented students at La Trobe University. We've certainly got a student population that reflects a lower socioeconomic background. So we were looking for partners that aligned not only with our demographics, but also with our focus on social justice and making sure that First Nations students are well represented and also supported. So that was critical. And then, as I said, finding appetite and making sure that timing was okay. Raul, is there anything you'd want to add?
No, Brett, I think you've covered it really well. And bearing in mind, of course, that one of the tensions that we found, as I'm sure all of you find in your respective lines of work, is the tensions between the existing resources and a desirable or ideal, for example, partner or partnership suite for Yani. We were mindful, of course, that we already work within the network of partners that we already have at the university. That establishing new partnerships it can be costly for the institution, for ourselves in terms of time, and that can distract us from other goals. So there is that tension as well. So what we've decided to do is to work with the resources we have, expand it, be ambitious, at the same time expand the network little by little, incrementally. And as we do, then making sure that those partners reflect the ethos of the original project, and also that we work well for them. And I think that's very important, that they're happy with the project, that they are invested, that they see value, and that they support. Then, of course, if that's the case, they will be more inclined to will participate enthusiastically in the project and making it succeed for everybody.
Great, thank you so much. There's a question that came in that's a bit linked to something you said, Brett. You mentioned how important it is for students to be well supported at a partner institution, and that you really look at that aspect, because that's very important for the Yani program. And there's someone in the audience today who's asking, does a program ensure elder engagement for Indigenous students, including dedicated mentors, for example?
It's a really good question. And I really wish that Renee and Sharon were here at the moment, because a lot of the groundwork for this in terms of building those relationships with First Nations centres within universities have been developed by Renee and Sharon. So I think they'd be best placed to answer this question. But we do know, and from the outset, that was one of the requirements of engagement, making sure that our students have access to the resources that are available to other First Nations students at the partner. So, and we were delighted to learn that the social program that we have here at Trobe University is very similar to what's available at the Canadian universities the students have found themselves at. And that includes engagement with elders. So there's an opportunity for them to meet with local students, First Nations students, but also be engaged in the community. So the social aspect, something that as a learning abroad practitioner, it's not something that would ever come up. But it was a requirement for us to make sure that our students had access to elders, had access to that extra level of support, which is facilitated by the First Nations centres that Renee and Sharon have been working closely with. Raul, is there anything I've forgotten there?
Absolutely. And Jocelyn, we mentioned this in our presentation as well. Thank you so much, Brett. The importance of giving the additional support of mentorship from here as well. So students have a sort of 2-point of support that is actually quite unique. They have the support and mentorship where they go, but they also retain a contact with an Indigenous mentor who's based at Indigenous Student Services here at La Trobe at distance. That's actually unique to the Yani program, and that also allows, of course, a better engagement with the experience of the student and timely support, timely and constructive support for their needs.
Great, thank you.
I should just mention that. I'm sorry, I should just mention that Sharon has done an outstanding job in terms of mentoring the students, and this comes out in the podcast that I'd mentioned, and I'll be sure to share that once I get permission. It's a wonderful testament to the work that she's done in this space by guiding and supporting those students as a mentor.
Yeah. Absolutely, Brett. It's been impeccable, and once again, really good demonstration of precisely one of the strengths of the program, that we've been learning from each other along the process, and certainly in this space, working with Renee and particularly Sharon, who's taking care of this aspect of the program, has been really rewarding.
Yeah, I'd be remiss not to mention that. I'm sorry, Nelly.
No. Thank you for adding to it. It's great. We have one more question in our Q&A box. It is a bit of a specific question, and I'm not sure, I might ask a person to clarify. Because it says, what process do your partner institutions go through in order for your institution to grant transfer credit to students participating in these programs in Canada? I'm assuming the person is talking about the Yani exchange program and not about the study tour. But do programs need to be for credit, or would non-credit programs offered in Canada also qualify for transfer credit in the Yani program?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. So our responsibility is to ensure that any student that goes overseas is receiving credit towards their degree. So that's a requirement from our side. That's part of our remit. So we don't generally facilitate programs without credit. And how that looks operationally essentially is that students go overseas, successfully complete their subjects. We receive the academic transcript, and then that's sent to a dedicated team within Ask La Trobe, which is a service which enables students to receive the credit, which has been pre-approved before the students go overseas, towards their La Trobe degree. I'm not exactly sure of the mechanics of how our partners facilitate that. We have a dedicated team outside of learning abroad who do that.
Those are all the questions we had in the Q&A box and that came in beforehand. I don't know if there are any final words you want to say about the Yani program, Brett and Raul, before we end this webinar today.
I'm going to jump in with 10 cents. I'd just like to express my gratitude. I'm really surprised, I think, and delighted at the response we've received. So it's wonderful that we can be here today to share the Yani program. I feel really strongly about the message it's sharing, and we've received tremendous feedback about the nature of the program. We know that the students, first and foremost, are having an absolutely wonderful time and being supported, in a really exceptional way by our partners, to whom I'm really, really grateful. But I just feel really privileged to be in a position where we're facilitating this incredible experience. And we've also received, some recognition from other areas, other stakeholders about the importance of this. I'm super excited to be working with colleagues that I have such a wonderful time collaborating with, and I think it's a wonderful program, and I'm singing its praises to anyone within earshot. So opportunities like this, don't come along too often. So I'd just like to express my gratitude for everyone that's managed to stay and listen throughout this webinar, but also for the opportunity to present and talk about something that's really close to my heart. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett. I absolutely share your enthusiasm for the program and also your gratitude to both the British Columbia Council of International Education and to our audience. One last bit that I wanted to add to your words, Brett. Once again, highlight the importance of relationships and team building for these kind of efforts, and among other reasons that we've mentioned. Also because we are aware that we're living through times of change that require from us novel solutions and approaches to make sure that the best intentions of promoting equity and inclusion in international education actually accomplished. And also, we're going through times, of course, in many universities, both in Canada and in Australia, through times of budgetary pressures, changes in the conditions that we enjoy for work. And we found that when we have, again, good relations among ourselves, but also with our stakeholders, navigating those changes is actually not only easier, but more effective. Resilience is a key outcome of having functional relations. So we definitely encourage you all when in carrying out your programs to consider this aspect, to make sure that the teams are working together well, and particularly that this relational element, the human element, as Brett mentioned in the presentation, is considered. Thank you so much again for the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brett and Raul, for being here, sharing your experiences, and also for the recording that we could see. Before we end the webinar, I quickly want to share with you some upcoming events. So January 22nd, we have an Education Agent Management Masterclass. January 30th and January 31st, we have our second annual BC Symposium that we co-organize with CBIE on advancing international student support, and then begin on February 13th. we have an international strategic planning workshop in the BC post-secondary education context. You can find more info about all of these events on our website. So feel free to take a look and sign up. And then when you leave, please fill out a survey. It will help us to improve our offering. And that being said, I wish you all a wonderful evening, and Brett and Raul a wonderful day, because I know it's way earlier there. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. And thank you again, Brett and Raul, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Nelly. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Nelly. Thank you.